Now, in the last lesson, we sorted out our little decimal point bug there. So we're no longer able to write 8.2, 0.3, 0.5, etc. And we can only add one decimal point to make our integer into a double. So in this lesson though, I want to look at how we can improve our current code, because you can see that it's getting a little bit too long. Now, whenever you find that your file's getting a bit too long, a neat trick is you can collapse individual methods and individual blocks of code. So for example, if I wanted to collapse this IB action num button press, then I can click just under the first line. I can hold down Command Option, and if I press the left button, then you can see that Xcode will neatly fold away that method, saving me my sanity and also clearing up the screen. And whenever I want to expand it, I can either double click on here or hold down Option Command and hit the right key. Now, in our case though, we can actually do one step better than that. Instead of just stashing everything away and hiding it by folding up our methods, we can actually refactor it and make it a lot simpler. And the thing that pains me right now is that we're converting numbers into strings and then strings into numbers all over the place. And this is an ideal use case for computed properties. So we learned about computed properties in the last module. Let's see if we can use what we learned to simplify our code and reduce redundancy. So right at the top here, just below the private var, I'm going to create a new private var. And remember what we said in the access levels lesson. Whenever you're creating a global variable, so something that is class-wide, you should always add the private keyword in front of it so that it limits the scope of this variable to only the enclosing curly braces. So this private var, I'm going to call display value. And this is going to be a double. And it's also going to be a computed property. So it's going to have a getter and a setter. So as a challenge, I want you to create a getter that simply gets the current value from the display label.text. So pause the video and see if you can complete this challenge. So if you remember, to create a getter, we just have to use the keyword get, and then we open up a set of curly braces. Now inside here, we have to return a value, and that is going to be the value that we're going to give whenever somebody tries to access display value. Now currently, whenever we need the value that's inside the display label, we just say display label.text force unwrap, and then we turn it into a double. So we can do that over here as well. Instead of writing it all out here, we can copy it into our getter and we can return this number. So that means that we don't have to have two guard statements or more if we decide to continue our code. And instead, we can simply delete these lines of code and replace the places where it was used with display value. So now when we hit this line of code and we're trying to figure out what to set inside the display label, then it's going to look and try and fetch the current value of the display label, which triggers our get block, and it's going to try and convert what's currently inside the display label.text into a double, and if it fails, then it'll throw a fatal error, but if it succeeds, then it's going to return that number as the value of our display value. So we can also delete these three lines of code here as well, and we can change this to our display value and this to our display value. So we've now already saved ourselves 6 lines of code. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to create a setter for our display value. And this is going to be a challenge for you as well. And so I want you to create a setter that sets the display label whenever the display value is updated. Because you can see over here, we're doing a lot of that setting manually and repeatedly. We're taking the display value, we're performing the calculation on it, then we're changing it back into a string, and then we're putting it into the display label. I want to simplify all of this by simply adding a setter to our display value computed property. So pause the video and see if you can complete that challenge. All right, so to create setters, we simply write set, and now in here we can tap into the exact moment when our display value is updated. And when that does happen, we can say display label.text is equal to the new value. And we can convert the new value, which is going to be a double, because display value is a double. Then we can convert that double into a string and put it into our display label.text. So now, instead of having this line of code, we can simply say display value is equal to display value multiplied by -1. Or if you really want to be fancy, you can of course do multiply equals -1. So display value equals display value multiplied by -1. Depending on which syntax you find easier to understand, then just use whichever one suits you. Now I can also update it over here by saying display value multiply equals 0.01. And we've now simplified another 2 lines of code, all because we now know how to use computed properties. So as you can see, by learning all of these advanced concepts, we're not doing anything that we weren't able to do before, but we're simply making our code more manageable and reducing the complexity and therefore the places where we can potentially make errors. So that means we can make more complex apps and write more code without getting it muddled into a bowl of spaghetti.